Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. It's really lovely to see some familiar faces and some less familiar faces. So thank you for being here. I'm Miriam Kessling, and I'm a cultural producer here at London College of Fashion. And tonight's talk is called Investigating the Material Past. This is part of our monthly LCF sampled series of public talks at the college, and we're fortunate to be teaming up with the Centre for Fashion Curation tonight as part of a series of events looking at exhibiting fashion. The talk and Q&A will last around an hour, and it will be followed by some free drinks in the bar upstairs, which you're all very welcome to join afterwards. We're fortunate to be joined by an incredible panel of experts who bring incredible knowledge and experience in fashion curation, conservation, and exhibition making. We have Professor Claire Wilcox here, who is a professor in fashion curation at LCF, a visiting scholar at the Oxford Centre for Life Writing, and former senior curator of fashion at the Victoria and Albert Museum. We have Alexandra Foxwell here, who is an exhibition maker, researcher, and graduate of MA Fashion Curation and Cultural Programming at LCF. And we also have Gisa Werner, who is a specialist in textile conservation and display, who has worked extensively on fashion and textile exhibitions in the UK and internationally. So please join me in giving them a very warm welcome.
Good evening and welcome everyone. Almost exactly 2 years ago, I was looking at the website of a respected trader in historical textiles and dress with no particular purpose in mind. However, something caught my eye. It was not embroidered, spangled, or overtly exceptional. Instead, it was rather the opposite, utilitarian and unadorned, unassuming, the type of garment that often gets lost to history precisely because of these characteristics. It was described as an artistic linen smock and appealed partly because of its clear connection to turn-of-the-century dress reform movements, but also because, as an ex-art school student myself, I'm interested in what practitioners wear and how the garments they choose often operate as a public symbol of artistic status. Of course, I succumbed. You can see at the bottom of this slide it says sold. And a week later, the smock arrived in the post. I unfolded it. It was surprisingly light and put it on a dressmaking form rather like this. Fundamentally unaltered, it immediately fell into shape, almost like a toile. And from this moment on, the garment very slowly started divulging its secrets. Supported by Janet Arnold Award, we formed a team, hoping that if we observed and researched its properties from our different perspectives and areas of expertise, for example, through the lens of material analysis and in the context of women's art education and genealogical study, we could frame it as an exemplar. Its rather ghostly properties seem pertinent, as if capable of absorbing and reflecting our findings, whatever the outcome. We wanted to colour in the story. In an essay in the Journal of the Healthy and Artistic Dress Union in 1894, the artist and illustrator Walter Crane argued that art education should and could support what he called the progress of taste in dress, from the study of classical drapery and medieval art to life drawing, or in his words, consciously bringing to bear upon it the results of artistic experience and knowledge of form. Here then was a garment that was both artistic in style and purpose. The fabric falls from the shoulders so that movement is unconstricted, yet the body is voluminous enough to accommodate the full skirts beneath that was so fashionable at the time. To wear a smock like this must have brought a sense of community, because, as Alexandra will go on to elaborate, increasing numbers of women in the late 19th century trained in different types of artistic production, from painting to ceramics, metalwork and embroidery. Surviving smocks like this aren't that common, but here's a comparable example dating from about 1900, with thanks to Jenny Lister, curator of 19th century fashion at the V&A, for showing it to us and sharing her thoughts on the biography of our garment. And here you can note the traditional smocked bodice, the product of an artistic hand rather than anonymous machine work, which was already feeling threatening to those artistic types. And the natural undyed fabric, which, like our smock, was washable and therefore, of course, hygienic. But what makes our garment rather special and compelling is the identifying tape carefully sewn into the inside neck. The name M. Bausch, followed by a separately attached to, was unusual. Who was this unknown woman? It was enough to make us want to know more. It was not the first time I'd been waylaid by a label. In 2007, I discovered a design by Christian Dior that had the traditional woven silk house label attached exactly where I would expect it to be. But next to it was another, rather more temporary missive made of cream tape with faint lettering on it. It's just to the left and half out of sight in this image. I can remember the frisson of excitement I felt when realising the word spelt out Sakers and Zemir. Zemir was the name of the design, we knew that much, and Sakers referred to a British manufacturer of luxury fabrics for the couture industry, who presumably would have supplied the bright red material. But it would have been unusual for a supplier to be noted in this way. It didn't make sense. However, what we didn't realise until making contact with the Sakers family was that the outfit must have been commissioned for Lady Agatha, wife of the owner of the company, and it was her name that the tape referred to. We confirmed this by taking the internal measurements of the garment and comparing it to a dress that we knew she had worn. Couture garments being made to measure accommodate the unique specifics of a body, rather like a fingerprint. Had that cloth tape come off or been removed, as it probably should have been, the trail would have gone dead. We felt the same about the name tape in our rather more humble smock. It was a clue that could not be ignored. Cash's woven cloth labels, with their characteristic red lettering, although you can have other colours today, are still a familiar sight for those whose children are forever losing their school blazer. J&J Cash was a Quaker company founded in 1846 in Coventry, first known for the production of delightful woven silk ribbons, which were very fashionable at the time. In the 1870s, they began producing embroidery work, which led to the production of name tapes, monograms, and other means of identifying garments and linen, partly for laundering purposes, but also for marking school uniforms, sportswear, and even army wear. Anywhere where there would be a community living or working together and where things needed to be identified with their owner's name because they were so similar. Cash's supplied woven numbers too. The fact that the number 2 follows the name suggests that M. Bausch had more than one smock, implying that she was committed to her practice, whatever that practice or education might be. The identifying label along with its number was clearly the route into the smock's past. So many questions, so many unanswered, but I'm glad to say Alexandra may be able to offer a few answers. And before I do, I just want to show you what Alexandra bought on eBay the other day. It turns out we were both bidding for it. Here it is, numbers, probably dating from sort of 1910s or 20s, from America, where Cash has also opened a department. Over to you.
It's my pleasure to be working on this project. I too, like Claire, attended art school, much to my traditional grammar school's dismay, and this was in 2010. As someone who benefited from the opportunity to study art, I feel a sense of connection to the courage and determination of the women who pursued creative paths despite societal constraints, paving the way for this kind of education to exist. In this section, I'll be discussing the methodology we've employed on the project beyond material cultural analysis. Our investigation has split into 2 main paths: image-based analysis and genealogical research. These approaches have allowed us to interrogate not just the object itself, but the wider socio-historical narratives in which it is embedded. When concrete information is lacking, Prown encourages speculation as a means of generating hypotheses about an object's cultural and historical significance. This involves making educated guesses about the garment's origin, symbolism, and social meaning based on comparisons with similar objects and knowledge of the historical period. We began with image-based research as a means initially to test our suspicions that the garment had belonged to a female artist, examining historical photographs from art schools that admitted women during this period. Figures 7 and 8 show female art students in smocks strikingly similar in silhouette and detail to our example. Even with the student on the right sitting at a workbench, you can identify features such as the curved front yoke, light gathers, and even a small pocket visible just below the table. These details suggest a shared language amongst female artists' smocks of the time, reflecting their practical purpose as garments that allowed for ease of movement while protecting the wearer's clothing. The origins of these garments can be traced to the durable, simply cut smocks worn by male agricultural labourers, constructed from squares and rectangles of cotton or linen to endure physical work outdoors. In Figure 9, women attending a clay modelling class at the Royal College of Art wear floor-length smocks, covering and protecting the length of their skirts, as they work on sculptures using a dark-haired male model who is seated towards the back. High-neck blouses are just visible beneath, and the women's hair is pinned up in loose curls. The smock's relaxed fit and functionality highlights a departure from traditional feminine dress, contrasting sharply with the corseted, tightly fitted garments that were prevalent in the Victorian era. The women's arms are lifted in various poses. Their figures are masked, appearing almost statuesque themselves. The Royal Academy, the first institution to provide professional training for artists in Britain, began admitting women in 1862, though their inclusion was marked by significant inequality and strict segregation was maintained in all classes. Women were banned from life drawing, considered a cornerstone of artistic education, as it was deemed improper for women to be in the same room as a naked model. The question of whether women could even be artists was strongly debated during this period. Prominent art critic John Ruskin declared in his Academy Notes of 1875, "I always said that no woman could paint." Women remained excluded from life drawing classes until the 1890s, and even then, their numbers were carefully controlled to prevent them from outnumbering male students. Even in the early 1900s, as in this photograph, some male students and staff regarded women as intruders, or, as they referred to it, the female invasion. Yet despite these barriers, art school offered women access to creative expression and the opportunity to challenge traditional expectations about what women could or should do. In Figure 10, a back view is shown as women diligently work on murals in a painting class. Their artworks stretch outwards, visually mirroring the wide hemlines of their smocks. The design, often open or buttoned up at the back, ensures ease of wear, allowing the garment to be slipped on arms first without disturbing elaborate hairstyles. A significant discovery during our own research revealed that our smock was originally open at the back, just like the ones in this photograph, but was later stitched closed, which Geza will explore in greater detail. Figure 11 is taken from a historical photo album, likely belonging to a student that attended the Royal Academy. It's interesting to analyse the composition in comparison to the more staged photographs we have just seen, which were likely used for promotional purposes or for inclusion in prospectuses. Here, the women appear freer, their smocks visibly dirtied from use, their poses and expressions candid. Their casual groupings suggest a sense of camaraderie and a sisterhood forged through shared artistic practice. Although the length of their smocks remain consistent, the photograph reveals a significant variety in design, with no strict standardization amongst students. Some feature delicate embroidery on or below the front yoke, while others are patterned or seemingly pieced together from whatever fabric was available. There are a wide variety of styles, but a sense of collective identity, forming a kind of uniform without uniformity. An article in an 1880 edition of the Ladies' World magazine stated, "No artistic dresser should be without a smock cut exactly like a farm labourer's." A group shot from the 1903 Royal Academy class, in Figure 12, also taken from a personal photo album, captures the women on the floor at the front in a relaxed pose. This informal setting offers a glimpse into their individual style and creativity, expressed through small personal touches. Some women adorn their smocks with flowers pinned to their chest, while others display lace collars that billow at the neck. This blend of style and artistry reinforces the dual purpose of the smock, a practical garment that also served as a canvas for self-expression. The early 20th century was a period marked by growing consciousness about women's rights and a rebellion against the restrictive clothing that had dominated previous decades. The dress reform movement, gaining momentum in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, was driven by a coalition of feminists and social reformers who argued that traditional women's clothing was not only physically harmful, but also a symbol of their subordinate status in society. They promoted garments like the smock, which better reflected the changing roles of women who are increasingly participating in the workforce. In Figure 13, another smock from the V&A's collection, and believed to have been worn by a female student at the Glasgow School of Art, features floral embroidery in purple and green, colours linked to the Women's Social and Political Union, a leading suffrage group. For many women, art training was both a path to financial independence and a bold political statement, a declaration of autonomy in a world that sought to confine them to the domestic sphere. Some suffragettes, such as Louise Joplin, even established their own art schools to actively support women in gaining the skills they needed to earn their own living. Photographs showing mixed gender classes at both the Royal Academy and Glasgow School of Art reveal differing attitudes and distinct gendered approaches to dress in art classes during this period. Women wearing artist smocks suggest a practical and functional attitude towards clothing, wanting to look the part. In contrast, you can see from these images that men predominantly continue to paint in suit jackets, demonstrating a retention of formality, even in a setting that required physical engagement with materials. Our image search also led to an investigation into the history of LCF and an exploration of the college archives here at East Bank. LCF has a long history of admitting female students, originating in 3 London trade schools for women. Seen here in figures 16 and 17 is the Barrett Street Trade School in 1915, which trained women in subjects including dressmaking, millinery, embroidery, women's tailoring, and hairdressing. The photographic archive revealed that students from these schools wore trade overalls individually designed to their specific area of study. These embellishments not only reflected the wearer's craft, but also imbued their uniform with a sense of pride and identity. For instance, dressmaking students wore white overalls with red and green embroidery, as in figure 18 here, while embroidery students included collars embroidered in red and gold. Requiring less physical movement than in art training, these smocks are belted at the waist and do not cover the full length of the skirt. The practice of marking smocks with symbols relating to occupation has historical roots. Seen here in figures 19 and 20, a milkmaid smock from 1880 is embroidered with hearts, suggesting care and nourishment, whilst a male carter's smock has curved embroidered lines representing roads. The distinguishing features are believed to have served an essential purpose at farm and trade fairs where workers could be easily recognised and hired based on their occupation. Aesthetically, the LCF uniforms reinforced a sense of professionalism while also reflecting the social values of the time, blending practicality with the Victorian ideals of propriety and modesty. Adopting this tradition, once tied to the practicality of manual labour in vocational and artistic contexts, becomes a statement of belonging and legitimacy, speaking volumes about women's evolving claim to the workplace. We begin to see how a single garment can expand our understanding of female and creative educational emancipation in the early 20th century. The women's efforts to assert identity in traditionally male-dominated environments challenges the anonymity often associated with female artistic contributions. The smock, once a symbol of male practicality and labour, becomes a statement of female independence, embodying the spirit of change. And now onto our name search. We had agreed that we might never uncover the identity of the owner. But with the name tape being the sole clue we had about the smock's provenance, it held potential to reveal answers about the garment's original use, as well as the social and economic circumstances of the person who wore it. The name, M. Bulch, machine embroidered on a woven tape in vibrant red, binds the smock to its past, much like the name scrawled on the front page of a diary. After getting an estimated dating of the smock for around 1905, I began my search with the National Archives, combing through census data for M. Bulch across England, Scotland and Wales over 4 decades, from 1881 to 1921. Out of 1,784 people with the surname Bulch, 83 were female M. Bulches, born between 1804 and 1910. These are marked with the red pins on the map. Among them, 11 were listed as servants, represented here on the same map with orange pins. The smock, singular, became about multiples, multiple women, multiple stories, and lines of inquiry. Many instances of M. Bulch within the same household indicated family groupings, such as mothers or daughters and sisters with the same initial and surname. Occupational details for the women were sparsely recorded, but I noted that 3 were dressmakers, 3 were laundry maids, and 2 were teachers, hinting at possible uses for the smock. It's important to mention that when I began this genealogical research, I had never seen or analysed the smock myself in person, only seeing the same photo Claire referenced earlier. I believe this allowed me a certain distance, approaching the discovery of the identity without preconceived notions, ensuring that nothing or no one was discounted. We could only speculate about the smock's original use. As the map shows, the Bulch surname was geographically concentrated in southern England, with a major presence in London and the southwest. When searches of historical student registers from major London art schools admitting women in this period were unsuccessful, I shifted focus to other locations on the map. Historical maps are invaluable as they helped locate addresses where road and borough names have since changed over time. I began concentrating the search in regional areas that had been known to have art schools and larger clusters of possible owners, also pinning primary and secondary schools in the vicinity, shown here with blue pins. The unusual surname of English origin in Somerset and Wiltshire was another advantage, hinting at deep roots in this region you can see here. A crucial link in the search was establishing the chain of ownership leading to Claire's acquisition of the smock. It had previously belonged to June Jeffreys, a collector of historical dress who lived on the significant Newhouse estate in Wiltshire. Many of her historical dress collection was inherited through her husband's family, but she also purchased at auctions. However, no information was left with her collection when she died in 2016, which meant that the smock could have come from anywhere in the country. I searched previous auction listings at local and London-based auction houses, but had no results. Yet notably, Mary Ann Bulch, a homemaker, and her daughter Maud Mary Bulch, a primary school teacher, were listed in the 1911 census as living in the same village as Newhouse, marked here with the flag, just 1.3 miles away. The younger M. Bulch matched the age and profile we were looking for, yet I had no proof which tied either of them to the smock or to Newhouse. This led me to contact local historians, the headmaster of a village school where Maud had worked, and even a vicar, looking for local knowledge about possible artistic societies, communities, or parish records. This extended the research beyond academic resources and into social history and oral testimony, demonstrating the importance of local networks. Like the map, many roads on this search have turned out to be dead ends. We had hoped to date the name tape by contacting woven name tape suppliers, which were limited in number, and possibly search previous customer records, but no archives survived. Luckily, I had early practice in this kind of research, as well as the disappointment and impetus to keep going. Many of my childhood weekends were spent travelling to record offices across East Anglia with my father, who was deeply invested in family history research. Searching for my own surname scribbled in Victorian ink in the optical reader was painstaking. I always knew that losing focus for even a second could break the chain. 2 weeks ago, I made the 300-mile round trip to a small town in Wiltshire that holds disparate records for the county. After 3 months of asking myself, how important is the owner's identity to this object, I had an exciting breakthrough. In the fee record book for the Salisbury School of Art, a regional art school that no longer exists, I found the name Maud Balch. She's here, I think the 8th one down. It was overwhelming to have found the key to this mystery. I stared at the handwritten name, almost illegible. I look back at this page now and wonder how I noticed it. Yet with such narrow focus on one garment, on one name tape, I probably could have recognised the surname in any handwriting. Born in 1888, Maud attended Saturday classes for women at the School of Art from 1904 to 1906, aged 16 to 18. She later became a teacher, and records from her live-in female training college indicate that she was graded on subjects such as drawing, suggesting that her early artistic training continued to play a role in her life. Perhaps she even wore the smock again during these lessons. Later inspection reports for the primary school where she became head teacher describe her enthusiastic lessons in needlework and drawing. It was rewarding to trace her journey beyond the art school and see how her training informed her teaching. One inspector even noted that the artistic activities seemed far too advanced for the children. The discovery of Maud Balch, M. Balch, in art school records provides tangible evidence connecting the smock to its historical context. However, questions remain. Further research is needed to fully contextualise this garment and its place in women's arts education during the period. I'll now hand over to Geza.
Thank you. Amazing. So my part of this talk will be to introduce you to the smock on a more practical level and to some visual details as well. I'm going to share some very nice insights that we have come across whilst working on it, whilst doing the object analysis with this garment, and I'm going to share some nice pictures of those details as well, and explain some further intricacies in detail. So as we can see on these slides, I've got a close-up of the fabric itself. The smock, we assume, is made from slubbed linen. It is possibly blended with cotton as well, because the surface has got a subtle sheen. There is some surface piling, and it is surprisingly light and very, very, very soft. It appears overwashed and possibly bleached as well. So it was well worn, but also well looked after in a way. So well used, well worn, well cared for as an object to be used as a protection for the garments to worn underneath. It's got a small pocket at around waist height. One of the seam at one of its ends has started unraveling, which I have secured now for a moment. So it doesn't look extremely overused, just as a pocket to store small items in, to keep small items in. Then there is some minor surface staining across the front, but other than that, it's in pretty good condition, given that it was probably worn as something during painting, during a practical work. So I want to go a little bit into detail of the pattern. So what we can say in terms of the way it's been cut, the top is cut as has got a yoke, a double layered yoke covering the front and the back. It's all cut in one piece. And it's got the straight of grain in the center back, which means that when we turn the object around, and you can also see this on my photograph, the back actually is cut on the bias, which had as a result the center back being slightly stretched, and my assumption is that the fabric isn't additionally supported, as you would often do with the top of a garment, to give it a bit more strength. In that case, that doesn't seem to have been the case. So it's all a bit stretched. There are 2 buttonholes that are a little bit overstretched as well, probably because it's cut on the bias, and also because of these buttons that are very prominent in that section. I'm going to talk about those buttons later as well as a slight anomaly that we have been thinking about. The main body of the garment, of the smock, is cut in flat panels with the as flat panels being gathered at the top and then being held together by the yoke. The measurement across the waist is approximately 35 inches, which I marked with my dart in the center. And we can say that this is, with certainty, that this is the overall fabric width, because from that point downwards, we've got the selvage running down towards the hem, and then towards the top, the fabric is being gathered and is being tapered and then sort of gathered in the yoke line. Further down towards the hem, the dress, the smock, was extended by inserting gussets to allow more movement, to also accommodate the width and the volume of the skirts beneath, and to make generally the movement more comfortable. So we end up having this very nice A-line. At the point of purchase, we had a seam running down the center back, which we, on further analysis and looking into more detail, actually have removed this afternoon, unstitched it, everything, because we all agreed that it must have been added at some later stage. And we've got more evidence that would approve our assumption. So therefore, and also as Claire being the owner, she gave her permission and her go-ahead undoing the seam. So, and in further detail, the sleeves are gathered at the top along the sleeve head, which is obviously also part of the silhouette of the time. Then at the inside of the sleeves, we've got French seams, and the fabric at the end of the sleeves is gathered into small cuffs as well. Again, I've got a little asterisk on my slide, which means I will refer to those and some oddities in regard to those cuffs as well. So talking about that back seam again, what struck us was very interesting, that the thread that it was stitched with is a different one than the rest of the threads that the garment would be made of. Also, the stitch tension is different, saying that the tension of the back seam was much more even than the overall tension of any other seam on the garment. When you look at, I go back a little further, my next slide, on the top corner, you can see what I've marked with my red square. The stitch tension is slightly off, and this is a detail that runs across the whole garment, whereas the back seam in itself was very nice and even. Also, the stitch length of that back seam is much longer. So generally, on the rest of the garment, we've got tiny, teeny stitches, which is often just the sign of stitch lengths in historical garments. And also, interestingly enough, this back seam is not as neatly finished as the rest of the overall garment, meaning the gown isn't, I wouldn't say the gown is worn, is made in an haute couture style, but it's well finished. There are no unraveling seams inside anywhere. Also, and then in contrast, this seam is not very well finished at the end, and it also has started unraveling at the top. So that made us fairly certain that this seam was added at some later stage. Furthermore, you can see that I place the button next to this unraveling seam at the top. We also assume that these buttons were added later. They look unusually large. An assumption is that possibly the garment would have been worn with fabric button, those washable buttons that you'd often find with utility garments. And also it shows that the thread is actually a different one as well, and it appears to be very similar to the thread that was used for the back seam as well. So back to my next slide. I've mentioned the tension and the stitch length already, but another very interesting detail that we came across, which we were very excited about, when the center back was still closed, we only noticed this aspect that around 44 centimeters down the center back, we've got an additional buttonhole, and on the opposite side, a small patch that, and one can also still see the threads, a patch where an additional button would have been added. So this is another very clear indication that it must have been worn open. And also, obviously, we tried to find the evidence, and I was comparing the thread exactly with the buttonhole at top, so it definitely appears to be the same. So very exciting to find this, and obviously having the evidence to do this gave us the confidence to remove the seam. Another detail that we thought was very interesting is the cuffs themselves, because these are, in contrast to the remaining parts of the garment, not very well finished. They seem to have been cut off at some point. So the assumption is they might have been either larger cuffs that would be large enough for the person sliding her arms into the sleeves and then without having to button anything. No idea whether that could have been the case, or whether it also had a buttonhole and a button. We will never know, but the fact is that the ends of the cuffs, they have been cut off in a very crude way. And in comparison to what I have on my slide here on the picture above, that is the inside of a sleeve, everything is finished in a way that no seams are unraveling, no threads are visible. This seems to be very crudely done, so another assumption that it was added at some point later. It's a bit of a shame, because it will remain a mystery to why this have happened, and we can't really return it to an original state, because we can't say for sure what it would have looked like. But it's interesting to make the assumption that it's probably something that was added later down the line. Furthermore, both of these cuffs, they are of different lengths, another indication that it was not originally meant to be. And then the last thing that we also came across was this little tear right in the center front, which we assume is from a brooch that had been added in the center front and been torn off or ripped off at some point, but it left this mark in the center front. This brings me to a close, my part. One further thing I wanted to mention, further down the line this year, we are aiming to create a small display that will include that smock, of course. We will be working on appropriate undergarments, and I will be working on the mounting as well, so it will be displayed alongside other material from the archive.
So I just really want to thank Alexandra and Geza for being as obsessive as me. In fact, I think more so. Finding Bausch, it was like a needle in a haystack, and I thank you for that 300-mile round trip. When you emailed me, I think I actually screamed, because I didn't ever think we would find her. But this is just one step in a journey. And at the same time, Geza's metaphorical unpicking of the garment and then reconstruction of it later for the display is really exciting. I don't know anybody who looks more closely at an object or that can conduct the most sort of exacting material analysis than Geza. And I have worked with her on many projects at the V&A, from professional to personal, including a last-minute panic about a wedding dress for a family member. She stepped in and made it in 4 days, or was it 5? And so, working as a team like this, it's really exciting, because we think about the luxury of time that grants such as the Janet Arnold Fund allow us to focus in on one object, not a collection of objects which has its own beautiful dynamic, things working against each other, telling a complex narrative. Instead, we're using one single object to unpack a complex narrative, which, in Jenny Lister's words, is a bit of a sort of feminist story. So going forward, we're going to have another update in the autumn, followed by the display. And in the meantime, if there's any questions, please go for it. We're ready to do what we can to answer any questions.
So have a roving mic.
That was just amazing. Thank you to all three. This is a question about an art school, actually. Whether you looked at Bushey Art School on your travels.
That did come up in one of my searches, actually, and the next stage of my research is kind of looking more deeply into art schools. So definitely I will be looking at that one. And I think, as we've now discovered, M. Balch went to a regional art school. It might be more of a focus on these kind of smaller regional art schools around the country, because a lot of research has been focused on the London art schools.
I just came across someone who attended that school in 1895, in fact, and exhibited at the Royal Academy that year. And there were obviously quite a few female artists, no doubt, wearing smocks, that attended that school. And I just wondered whether on your travels you'd found any of the biographies. Because there's one I'm hunting at the moment. Yeah. So
that's great. And I mean, it's really good. And actually, if there's anybody out there who's got any clues that might help us, then we'd really like to know. I mean, these women's histories can get so easily lost, especially if the student does not become a sort of leading artist. It just goes. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you get the sort of selective publishing of the annual for the Royal Academy show, and a lot of the women just drop off the list because they're just not printed. And you have to sort of look at their address at the back of the book. But it was just fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to echo that. It was just amazing. I really enjoyed it. Mine's a really small suggestion. I think it's the smock in the V&A that's got violets on it, embroidered, and there's the symbolism of violets, and they're about love and innocence. And I can't remember all the details, but there was something about the symbolism of them, that they were originally white, and when Mary saw Jesus on the cross, her tears turned the petals mauve, and there's all sorts of symbolism around violets that, it's not a coincidence that it's violets on that smock, I don't think.
Is that the suffragette one?
The one you highlighted, the suffragette colours, exactly.
Yes.
And I think, the symbolism of the flower is important too.
That's so interesting, because when we were looking in the archive here, and there was an open session earlier today, which maybe you went to, we were looking at black and white photographs of coloured embroidery on yokes, and yet sometimes the description did actually mention the colour.
Yeah.
But each discipline, as Alexandra said, had its own sort of floral signifier, which is very, very interesting.
I've done loads of work on violets, so if you contact me, I can share it with you.
Definitely.
Great.
Joanne.
Thank you. Yes, it was a really fascinating detective story, and it's great to see how it all feeds together into this information. But I just had a general question about do you have a sense of what happened to these smocks when perhaps women, did they stop being artists? I was surprised at how many art schools there were, I guess, and so that there was probably quite a large number of these smocks. Is there a second-hand market in them? Do you get a sense of that they preserved in families or reused? I was just interested in that, if that's a...
Not very many survive, which is amazing given how many must have been made, and M. Bausch certainly had more than one. But I think in this case it was used later, because the buttons at the back, we think they're sort of possibly 1930s, don't we? So, maybe she kept working. And the next step in the research is to persuade some V&A scientists to do microscopic analysis of the textile. Because when we did the Frida Kahlo exhibition, we did that, and we found traces of paint in the fibres, which would be invisible to the naked eye. And that sort of proved that Frida was actually painting in those Mexican clothes. They weren't just worn for show. she was actually an artist who wore that clothing when she was painting her own self-portrait. So maybe there'll be some traces of, I don't know, oil paint or little, bits of metal or something. We just don't know. So that's the next step, is to dig really deep into the actual textile. Because just as the form and the label and the photographs, they all, add to the picture, the textile is very interesting to me. I mean, we don't even really know whether it's hand-woven or not, do we? That's something we need to work out. And we don't know whether it's slubbed because it's been overwashed, or whether it was always like that. I mean, you think it might have been bleached, don't you?
This is how it feels because it's so exceptionally light.
Yes. I mean, but the thing about these neutral, sort of rather sculptural materials is that they were washable, and it sort of tied in very nicely with the notion of hygiene and, Cash's names tapes being washable. So it was about a change in silhouette and in material, in purpose. And I do think this period around about 1905 is particularly interesting. But thanks for your question. Ben. Okay.
Getting my steps
Thank you. I really thoroughly enjoyed the geekiness of this evening. It was, I luxuriated in it. I'm wondering, and my mind is going in all sorts of directions about how you describe this to the wider world. Given your background in writing, given Geza's background, given Alexandra's research, how you could envisage actually telling this story to the wider world. It's almost like this multimedia extravaganza of all these different visual, written, moving image, still image. And I just wondered if you'd even started imagining how you could tell the story.
It's a really good question. So, sort of, I brought in the Dior outfit as a kind of, profound contrast between the humble and the exceptional, and, couture and home dressmaking. And certainly in the case of Dior, it did, as you saw, got splashed on the front page of The Guardian because it was a discovery of an outfit that had been thought lost. I mean, I'd never ever seen one in any museum, and the original is still not extant. I mean, the red version was a version. So that had enough sort of gusto behind it to be a really good story. But in terms of this, I think I sort of imagine a rather more gentle, circular approach, but how that would manifest itself after the display, I don't yet know. I think that maybe it could form part of a revisiting of the relationship between art education and practitioners of art education affecting clothing, rather than artists adopting changes in fashion already. What's the balance between the two? So I think that could be quite a nuanced approach. But if you've got any ideas, let us know.
Oh, I think that's it. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
That was such a fantastic talk. Really inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm sure you're welcome to come and have a look at the smock if you'd like to come up to the front. And please feel free to join us in the foyer upstairs for some drinks. But yeah, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. What a highlight of my week.
Thank you for coming.